Is America a great state? I can assure your Canadian viewers that the CBC is misleading you. I mean, when I moved to the U.S., there's a lot of stories in the news about American historians from Yale coming to the University of Toronto, to escape Donald Trump. Of course, there's all a cock-up story because anybody who knows anything about academic appointments knows that those things are in the works for months, years. So it is a total cock-up. And yet nobody from the CBC, you're the first sort of media person to reach out to interview me for going the other way. And what you never see in the CBC is that there's way more Canadians down here than there are Americans going there.
Concepts with Shawn Whatley.
Welcome to Concepts. My name is Shawn Whatley, and today we have Professor John von Heyking back with us again, except this time he's got a new placement. John is currently Associate Director and Professor at the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, Arizona State University. He's a celebrated author, award-winning teacher, just an all-around fantastic guy. Our conversation started with a discussion about the new program that he's the associate director of. And I said, how can you get a public university to actually pay for something like this? And he said, well, actually, the Arizona State Legislature passed legislation saying that there needs to be civic education. So it came right from the top. Now, they still have academic freedom and they can take it in whatever direction they think appropriate based on their training and experience. But basically, the state said we need to have students learning more about where our liberty comes from, learning all the way back Greek philosophy. That's his specialty, Plato, Aristotle, constitutionalism. So it's fascinating to see a program like that. He said it's actually a program that's in competition with Hillsdale College, where one of my daughters is attending right now, and possibly a second one will it be attending. So it's encouraging to me to see a renaissance in classical thought, training in classical thought, civics education. And that's, again, where we start our conversation. And from there, we ramble through constitutionalism, the difference between Canadian form of government versus American form of government. Why are debates in the House of Commons so exciting in Canada, whereas debates in the States, as Bagehot put it, they're a speech without a play, or something to that effect. We covered a lot of philosophical ground in this, but it's very conversational. So we jumped around to so many topics that I think you'll find you'll either be frustrated that we're talking about too many topics at the same time, or you'll find it light enough and quick enough that it's more entertaining than usual. Regardless, I had a blast, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and let's get on with the show. Welcome back, Professor John von Heyking.
Thanks. Great to be here. Nice to see you, Shawn.
I appreciate you making the time. And in the green room, you were telling me that it's only 80 degrees and you might not be as well set up for swimming today. But as I was scraping the snow off my roof just a few minutes ago, I'm very jealous of you.
Well, it's a hard life down here. It's a hard life.
That's right. So you got to tell us. So for listeners, probably most people already know you, the people who listen to this podcast. So you were professor, chair of the Department of Philosophy, I believe, at Lethbridge.
Political science. Yeah,
political science.
Yeah.
And now you're at Arizona State University. And so you've got a foot, you're not quite there, but you're not here anymore. So you are in a perfect position to give us an analysis of the difference in politics between the two. So what's going on in America, and tell us what you're teaching right now.
Yeah, so we'll start with that. So I've as of August, I'm the associate director and professor at the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. That's a bit of a word salad, so we just say we're from the Civics school. And it's a faculty of 24, so I'm the associate director, and it's mostly political theorists. And then there's a few historians and also scholars of war and strategy as well, and a couple of sort of political economists, right? Not your kind of quant jock economists, but people who know their Adam Smith and so forth. And so SCETL, or Civic School, was started operations in fall of 2017 to address sort of a twin crisis facing upper education in the United States. The one is the crisis of civic literacy, which is that Americans don't know their own constitution. So, they need Canadians now to do the job that no American wants to take. So we have to teach them that. And the other is to address the problem or the shortcomings of viewpoint diversity in higher education. And it's not so much, you need more conservatives, but it's more, you need more people who are studying and teaching some of the classics like Plato's Republic or Clausewitz or James Madison or political history, like the political history of the American Revolution, for example. So historians in Canada or many in the United States don't really do political history anymore. They do social history. So things like that. So it's not so much the ideological viewpoint diversity, but it's what sort of questions and questions that have great significance for the life of citizens. And so that's why it's the School of Civic Thought and Leadership and Economics, because we have a wing of teaching economics.
So brilliant. Yeah, I wish I was younger. I could come to your school, and
you're welcome to come anytime. Come on your holiday.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. Actually, I'm not joking. I look at what my kids are studying. Two of my daughters now are at Hillsdale. Actually, one's just in the process of accepting or not. The other one's in master's.
Hillsdale's great, and in fact, Hillsdale's kind of a competitor institution. We're all kind of cooperate, but it's sort of a competitor because they offer a curriculum that's very much like the one we have.
Interesting.
And so obviously you figured that out. And the difference is that we're part of a very, very, actually the largest public university in the United States. There's over 150,000 students at this place, both online and in person. Yeah, it's just enormous. So that also means there's a much broader swath of curriculum offered at a place like Arizona State. So, we recruit people who are interested in that kind of curriculum and say, well, you can also do a double major and do some, bioengineering.
Wow.
Which you wouldn't be able to do at a place like Hillsdale.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of PhD locations for my daughters. So, but how did you
It's
ever
coming,
get?
It's coming, not yet.
It's coming. Yeah. How did you ever get funding for such a program? So you're a public university, and you're asking questions that are non-Hegelian, right? If we think the past is no good and the future is the only thing that matters, is this just a fetish, or are you actually doing practical work that you hope to apply to practical policy questions?
Yeah. So Schedule was created as an act of the Arizona State Legislature in 2016, and its original budget was a line in the state budget. That now has been folded in, but the important thing is that the impetus came from the Arizona State Legislature, and as part of the founding legislation, our director, on an annual basis, has to give an in-person report of our activities to the state ledge. So the impetus for creating us came from the outside, but at the same time, we were very fortunate that our president and provost's office has been very supportive, and they recognize the important work that we do. And so you need friends internally as well. And ASU is a little bit different than most other places. I found that it's a very quick-paced place. If you're an administrator, which that's one of my hats, and it comes straight from the top. Our president, Michael Crow, he's actually a PhD in political science or public policy, and he's a dynamo, and he's transformed the university in the 20 years he's been here.
Now, is that because you're more of a level organizational structure, or you're more spread out? There are a few levels of people to ask for permission before you get something done, or why do they move more quickly?
Well, the demand for quick action comes straight from the top. Yeah, so it is a pretty vertical structure.
So it's just an expectation.
Yeah,
Wow.
It's the culture. And as part of my duties, I've been taking a leadership program that anybody sort of at the director level has to take. And a lot of it is basically, here's how we do things at ASU, which is very helpful as a newcomer.
Sure. So now, as soon as I hear the state said, thou shalt teach X, Y, and Z, what about academic freedom? Oh my gosh, Big Brother's now brainwashing us. So talk about that.
Yeah. So the directive is at 30,000 feet. So we need kids to learn about civics. We need kids to learn about the foundations of the American Republic, of liberty, equality. And it doesn't go further than that. So that gets translated into, maximum academic freedom. We've got people who teach American constitutionalism. We've got people like me. I teach kind of classical political thought, religion and politics. I just taught part of Plato's Republic this morning. That's where I was just at. So there's a lot of freedom to teach. And it comes down to, as with any kind of academic hire, a lot of it comes down to who you hire.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned Plato's Republic. I'm just reading through Alan Bloom's version, which I like. I don't know who wrote the old one I read 20 years ago, but his is much better. And it's really nerdy, and I'm not sure how practical it is. So how do you make your teaching practical? Or maybe I'll just say, like, are students knocking down the doors to get into your program?
They actually are. Yeah. I've had to sign off on a lot of sort of late registrations, just kind of after the deadline for when students are allowed to register. I still need this requirement. So a lot of our classes are what we call in the business service teaching. So a lot of my students, it's in the spring semester. So a lot of my students, they need a humanities class to graduate, but most of them are not Schedule majors, but they're STEM major, they're business school major, whatever. So as with any kind of, it's a freshman class. So as with any class, your main purpose is to recruit them.
Exactly.
Right. And even if they don't become majors, you can get a minor.
Right.
You can get a certificate. So it's stuff like that. And that's what we're building. We're trying to build out the major, but in order to build out the major, you kind of have to build out the minor, build out the certificate, and get a wellspring of students. Because, after all, we're still building.
Yep.
Right. We're still building the program, and we're still kind of new. People don't really know what this is. Right.
Yeah. But at 25 faculty, that's, you're well along the way. Oh my goodness. It's not small. So are you successful at recruiting?
Well, I'm still early in. So we'll see how we do at the end of this semester. I'll get my report card then. But it's sort of like any kind of good teaching. You come for the, fulfill the requirement, but you stay for the content.
Right.
You can stay for the curriculum. You stay for the good teachers. Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned a different vibe when it comes to administration at ASU. Is that just ASU, or is that just America, or is that American liberalism? Like, where does that come from?
I think there's probably a difference between American and Canadian universities when they come to how they're run and administered. I think American culture is more dynamic than Canadian culture to begin with. And of course, my knowledge of it is largely anecdotal because I taught at one Canadian institution for 25 years, and now I'm in this place, and they're very, very different in tone and character. But as a generality, American culture is more entrepreneurial. And ASU, of all the American institutions, sort of prides itself on its entrepreneurial culture as a university, which is kind of unusual because universities tend to go the opposite way, right? It's hard to get any kind of change out of a university, but here it's actually the opposite way. Yeah. So I think it's American culture, but higher octane dose, and it's fun. It's really neat. Yeah.
So you shared a news clipping or announcement. I forget what it was. Maybe it was a Twitter thing about Francis Whittleson, being arrested in Canada. So it seems like Canada is still pretty woke, at least on the campuses. Do you see that in the States, or have you guys become post-woke now? You moved on to something else exciting, or?
I wouldn't say America's become post-woke, but I think for all the flaws of Mr. Trump, um, the image I have of his presidency and how he's shifted the politics is that he's a gigantic Titanic boat that runs over things, but that also creates openings for people who can do constructive things. And just as one little indicator, we have been approached in the civic school by foundations who want to support our programming on civics, who 5 years ago wouldn't have touched us.
And are they industrial type programs, or are they
No, they're kind of civics oriented. They wanted, they want kids to learn about, being good people, being nice people, being good, tolerant liberals, and these sorts of things. But they're less likely these days to say they hate America.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
the reason I ask is because you're alluding to funding, and this is something that's come up in a number of people that I've talked with over the last year. There are certain things that are fairly easy to fund. So if you're economic liberty, great, lots and lots of funding for that. Civics, not so much. So you have found funding for civics. Or is that just ASU and that's it? The rest of the states is bone dry?
So, one of the big operations in the United States is the Jack Miller Center, which is a huge foundation whose specifically, their purpose is to promote civic education, I think both post-secondary and K-12. So they are one of the important funders and movers on a lot of this. And, you might have heard of the Civic School here in Arizona State was the first, and now there's lots of them around the country. So there's the Hamilton Center at Florida. There's the Civic School at UT Austin. Ohio State has just built 5 of them in their state system, at the main campus in Columbus, but also at the other ones at Cleveland State. Cleveland State also hired another guy from Canada to run that. So there's Canadians taking jobs that Americans don't want. So they're popping up all over the place. And the thing that I attribute it to is that universities matter to Americans. Even to, you see these stories about trust in universities being quite low among Republicans, for example. Well, it's also Republicans who don't mind taking them back and funding things to sort of counter the woke stuff. And I attribute that to a greater sense of patriotism amongst Americans and seeing universities as playing a role in that. Michael Crow, the ASU president, he writes about post-secondary politics and so forth and kind of what the universities need to do. And one of the points he makes is that one of the very first things that the Puritans did when they landed at Plymouth Rock in the 17th century was to build Harvard, right? Build Harvard. Did lots of other stuff, but they built Harvard. So you have it right at the founding moment. Higher education has something very important for the promotion of civic welfare, civic virtue in America. And you just don't see that kind of emphasis. I mean, you see some people like Thomas D'Arcy McGee and a few other people around Confederation, Edgar Ryerson. But of course, you know better than I do how toxic those names are. I mean, they're knocking down statues. I mean, maybe not in the last couple months, but those sorts of names are toxic for all the, Canada-hating wokesters. And so you don't have a kind of well of patriotism in Canada that can counter the Canada haters, just as you have the patriots here who can counter the America haters.
So it's fascinating that you say it's patriotism. A thought that also came to mind was, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it, was the issue of anti-intellectualism, especially amongst some groups of conservatives. But we'll just put a pin in that for 1 second. I wanted to mention, I was talking with Ray Pennings, and he did a study, or his institute, Cardis, did a study, I think it was last year, recently anyways, a very large study, comparing Canadian and American thought. Most of their research is on religion, in very, very broadly speaking, all kinds of religions. But they did ask a question that got to the heart of trust in institutions, trust in government to actually make a difference, or a sense. I'm ruining the question, but I believe it was a sense of, do you think getting involved in government will make a difference? And for Americans, it was very, very high. I think it was over 70%. For Canadians, it was very low. There was a very low sense that government will be able to do anything for you, no matter how much you get involved. So I wanted to throw that out there. You've mentioned patriotism, but then there's also the issue of, are we maybe just more anti-intellectual, at least on the conservative side of things in Canada? And then the third element in that is whether or not we actually trust that we can make a difference. Yeah. So 3 different things: patriotism, intellectualism, and trust. Yeah. You're still going to stick with patriotism, or can I get you to commit to a different reason too?
I mean, I think one of the differences between America and Canada, and I'm not sure if it's a structural difference or just sort of one with the times, is that the American system has a lot more inputs and outputs, a lot more vents. So, the big vent that's coming up here later this year in the United States are the midterm elections. Everybody in the House of Representatives is up for election. 1/3 of the Senate up for election. And everything that Mr. Trump does has an eye to that, or at least should, right? And there's a lot of people who say he's going to have a hard time hanging on to the House, or, all that. So Americans have, and it's not just at the federal elections, there's state, there's local, there's the local judge, there's the local dog catcher, there's this or that. I mean, it's almost saturation point. But the point is that America has many points of entry, many venting points where citizens, even if their vote doesn't make a difference to vote for who the president is, well, in the local election, that makes a difference. And I don't have any numbers on, I know in Canada, turnout for local election is barely raises a pulse. I would suspect it's a little higher in the United States, but I don't have any numbers on that. But I think those multiple points of feedback in the system, those multiple venting points, give citizens in the United States a better sense of their civic efficacy. May not translate into better civic literacy, but at least the sense of efficacy, I suspect. Now, I mean, in a lot of ways, a lot of the tone gets set at the national level, and I think some of the problems in polarization in the United States has to do with a greater attention, a greater concentration of political debate being at the national level. And sort of how that impacts down to the local level. So I'm a fan of federalism. I think localism is important. I encourage my students to go, participate in municipal politics. I always have done that. One of my graduate students, I still have a graduate student at Lethbridge, and her thesis is on municipal politics and what political philosophy can teach you and how to be a good, ruler.
Wow. So my sense of the success or failure of your program is actually not related to the content. It's related to you and the other individuals in your department. So I think you probably attract students into political theory just because they like Professor von Heyking. Hey, he's smiling and he's not going to be mean to me, and so I want to take his courses. But that's a separate
Well, that's
discussion.
what teaching is. Right?
Yeah.
It's the person.
Yeah.
That's do you remember the content, or do you remember your prof?
That's true. That's true. That's true. So you mentioned debate, and it popped to mind. I think this is in Walter Bagehot. Really weird. I've been reading his little book, the English Constitution.
Yeah.
Have you really? Just recently?
Yeah, the English Constitution. I'm writing a paper on it. Yeah.
No way. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you writing your paper on?
So I taught it the very last upper level class at Lethbridge that I taught.
Yeah.
It was Tocqueville and Bagehot.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And Bagehot was mostly because Canadians need to learn their constitution.
Yes.
And I mean, he published it in 1867, so that was right when the Confederation happened. So the fathers of Confederation probably wouldn't have read it.
They missed it.
They missed it, but they knew it. They didn't need to read it,
Interesting.
right? 'Cause they knew what the English Constitution was about. They did. I mean, Bagehot just describes. He doesn't invent.
Yeah. So,
Right?
so
And he's a
so
terrific
that's
writer too.
and I believe it was published in a magazine, but more for a broader audience, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Each chapter.
Well, I mean, he founded the Economist magazine, so
I
it's
didn't
probably
know
in that.
Interesting. So that's fascinating that we're both reading that. The reason I'm reading it is because of the debate that we were having last fall. Actually, I had Sean Spear, and he won't mind me mentioning this, and Anthony Kosh, and we were talking about whether or not government should be neutral. And Anthony Kosh was saying government can't be neutral.
It
It's
is.
impossible.
Yeah.
And Sean was saying, no, it must be neutral. So more of a liberal, neutral proceduralism. And so it was fascinating to watch the two. But one of my questions, and so that's why I bought the Bagehot and started reading through it. And I said, it's one of my questions for Sean. And he didn't have an answer. I didn't expect him to, but I was reflecting on the efficient and the dignified aspects of the Constitution. And I said, I think we haven't emphasized, especially in Canada, enough of the dignified side and really seeing why that actually matters and really fostering an affection for the dignified element. So that's how that came up. But my reason for mentioning Bagehot to you, and you can comment on that in a second if you want, but my reason for mentioning Bagehot to you is I believe he talked about debate and how it's different in the Westminster system, House of Commons. It actually really matters. Your government could fall. Whereas in Congress or, in the House, people don't even need to follow it because nothing's going to happen. The only thing that really matters is the elections. Lots of elections.
Right.
Stand for election. Get involved. Vote. So I wanted you to reflect on that and whether or not you think Bagehot is right on that point about debate really not mattering that much in the States compared to how very much it matters in Canada or in the Westminster system.
Yeah. And we have to be careful too that the parliament he's describing is not the Canadian parliament. I mean, Tom Bateman, who's a political scientist out in Nova Scotia, I think he's at St. Mary's. I can't remember which one of those colleges, but he has a great essay that he published where he says, regarding the dignified and efficient parts, Parliament, but for Bagehot, the monarchy is the dignified because it's what everybody can kind of see in their heart is just, they love it. But the efficient is Parliament. That's where the business goes. And he says that doesn't apply to Canada anymore if it ever did. Rather, Parliament today in Canada is the dignified. It's the courts that are the efficient.
Oh, wow.
Now, insofar as the courts sort of are also an arm of the PMO, that has to be qualified, but you get the point.
Yeah.
So Bagehot, he doesn't talk about neutrality, right? It's not about neutrality. Parliament is party government. Party government. It's a team sport. So maybe there's a neutral point somewhere in the middle there, but he doesn't spend any time sifting through it. And it's party government. It's team sport. Parliament, even in the procedures, he talks about it a little bit, but even in the procedures of government, the procedures of Parliament, it derives out of these Renaissance rhetorical devices, pro et contra. Think of debate club. Civitas. Is the pro et contra is always a popular thing at Civitas. Somebody argues for something, somebody argues against something. And that's the essence. That's the essence of Parliament. So even if you have consensus between the parties on a certain measure, the procedure itself invites opposition. Because government and opposition are sort of built right in. Party government is not incidental. It's of the essence of Parliament. And so it's always debate, it's always party, it's always contestation.
So I'm cutting you off. I
Yeah,
apologize. So you mentioned party government. Now,
Yeah.
Bagehot also seems to say that, maybe it's a critique I read of Bagehot, where he's really emphasizing cabinet government. And he seems to say that there are individuals that maybe even, at least it sounded to me, that maybe they're not even part of his party. They're appointed there by the crown, shall we say. And so this sense of cabinet, at least as I was understanding it, you're going to correct me on this, was a governing body that was larger than just the party itself. And yet now in modern times, we've gone so much overemphasizing the party that the cabinet that he described really doesn't exist in the same way. So have I got that wrong, or?
I read him a little bit differently. I read him when it comes to cabinet government. I mean, yes, indeed, the parliamentary government is cabinet government, but the members of cabinet, including the prime minister, are drawn from the House. Right. So he has this famous metaphor. Right. He disputes the claim that Parliament is separation of powers. Right. So he claims fusion of powers.
Right.
And there's kind of a famous metaphor he uses that the cabinet is the buckle.
Right.
He's got another metaphor that I think is better and truer to his reasoning, and which is the following: that cabinet, and especially the prime minister, go on the other side. The House is a horse. Cabinet, led by the prime minister, is the rider. The House, as any good-spirited horse, wants to move. The rider guides it. But of course, if the horse don't want to go that way, the horse ain't going to go that way. So it's a more dynamic metaphor than the simple buckle. If you imagine, I don't know if you ride horses. I've gone on the occasional trail ride. I'm Albertan, but I don't ride horses. They're big beasts, and they're the personification both of wisdom and of spiritedness, right? And you gotta be strong yourself to guide them, but you also have to respond to them. And I think that's what he's getting at. And so, James Madison in Federalist number 51, when he's talking about the separation of powers, says ambition counteracts ambition. That's exactly, I think, what Bagehot's point is, with the horse being the House and cabinet prime minister being the rider, that you have ambition countering ambition, the difference being that they have to be closer together than at least what Madison prescribed. And the reason why they have to be closer together is to protect liberty and for effectual rule. Right? That's his criticism of the American presidential system. At one point he says, in Congress, it's like a speech without the play, right? So when Bagehot is talking about House and cabinet, or legislative and executive, being in this kind of fused manner, it's both for effective rule because they're close enough, they touch each other, and so they can act with one another. But of course, it also promotes more responsibility because the people in the House, he says, exert a continuous, exercise a continuous motion on the executive. They see them, right? Machiavelli has this line where he says that the many see, but the few who surround the prince touch, which is his way of saying that if you just see, you can be tricked.
Yeah.
But if you touch, it's a lot harder to get tricked. So Bagehot, he kind of subverts Machiavelli, right? Responsible government for Bagehot means those who touch are the first in line to place a check on your prince.
Yeah. No, I like that line, speech without a play. That really,
I don't know if it's not quite perfect.
Yeah, but that concept. So my sense of the buckle was that the cabinet was able to use your language, touch the efficient and the dignified at the same time. You're touching the House and the executive and getting things done. So
Yeah.
it almost seems structured to be, I'm struggling for the word, principally or foundationally or conceptually. It's on a different conceptual premise than separation of powers, than a contest. It's almost, you can even see it in the language. In Canada, in Britain, the British system, you're Her Majesty's, how does it go? Her Majesty's loyal opposition.
Loyal opposition, yeah.
As opposed to the American, again, what do I know? But my sense from the outside is that it's more of you're not really the loyal opposition. You're the sworn enemy, and I'm going to fight you guys.
Right.
As opposed, so have I got that wrong? That the different vibe that you get from the American, more combative, shall we say, and yet we see far more raucous and combative excitement in the House of Commons because it could actually bring down the government. But as structurally, there's less of a separation. If cabinet government still exists, some people argue that, well, we've gone beyond that. But
well, look how Mr. Trudeau lost his job. His finance minister told him, pulled the plug. And that was the end of Trudeau, right? That's the party. That's the caucus, right? Or you think of Keir Starmer in England. He's hanging on by a thread. But it just wasn't that long ago when he won by a big majority, right? And so the reason why he's hanging on by a thread, for the same reasons that Trudeau lost his job, was that his own party pulled him. They got the boot. And that's the lingo for Westminster systems, getting the boot. Or you think of, further back in Canadian history, Liberal prime ministers, Martin replacing Jean Chrétien.
Yeah.
Alberta, right? The greatest enemy for any Alberta UCP or Conservative premier is their own caucus.
Yeah.
Right? So that's not necessarily the House doing the dirty work, but the House is sort of the next step.
So in that sense, they're so intimately connected. They have power to give people the boot. Whereas the American approach, you have a greater separation. Like once you're in, you're in. And so that's safe to say? Okay.
I think that's safe to say. And I think that's also one of the reasons why the impeachment power has been wielded in such a political fashion, is that's kind of the only option on the table in the American system where you can sort of force your political opponent out on a on a early basis. Yeah. Right. So it's kind of the American equivalent to the boot or the voting non-confidence.
Yeah. It seems like political theater from up here, but I take your point.
There's lots of that.
There's lots of that. So tell me more about the Constitution then. So something I get excited about is the unwritten Constitution. Canada's got an unwritten Constitution, goes back, it's 800 years, and yet one of the marks of pride, one of the things they're most happy about, at least to the podcasters I talk to in the States, is the fact that America has it's a creedal nation. And I say, no, wait a second. You also have a whole ton of English stuff packed in there. It's presupposed.
Yeah.
Now that's just me.
And
so what are your thoughts on the written versus unwritten Constitution and whether or not, go ahead.
Well, some of my colleagues here would have a better knowledge of the customs. But so this year, 2026, marks the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is not the Constitution, but it is a constitutional document. And the best way I heard that described is Plato has a dialogue called The Laws. And I've taught it. It's actually his longest. So you got to be sort of ready for a long slog to get through this one.
I haven't read it yet.
I recommend it. It's wonderful. But I mean, when readers first approach it, they think they're going to be reading about sort of written constitutions. But what they end up discovering is that the most important part of your constitution are what Plato calls preludes. Calls them songs, even. So that the kind of preludes or preambles that sort of explain what the rest of your constitution is going to be doing. And so I recently listened to a podcast, a guy wrote on the Declaration. He said the Declaration is to the Constitution the way Plato describes the preludes. And that's, I mean, the Declaration, of course, is written. So we're not looking at the distinction between written and unwritten, but we are looking at the reality that the written Constitution can't exist without the preludes, whether written or unwritten. So, and so, I mean, Canada kind of has recognition of that too. So we've got the Constitution Act of 1867, which is the official term. We don't call it the BNA Act anymore. And of course, we've got the Constitution Act of 1982, which is otherwise known as the Charter. But if you look in the preamble of the 1867 Act, it up and says, we're going to have the same system as the English Constitution. And that everybody at the time, the founders, all knew what that meant. And it's exactly what Walter Bagehot describes. It's responsible government. It means you're going to have a legislative supremacy. You're going to have a monarchy. You're going to, the executive is going to be waged in the monarch, you know, under the advisement of the council. The word prime minister never shows up in the Constitution. There's another convention for you. The word political party never shows up in the Constitution. These are all conventions, right? But the Constitution, and the only other place in that sort of is more explicit about the English Constitution and responsible government are in Articles, was it 54, 55? It's the spending authorization. That spending can only be authorized by the House of Commons and you know, proposed by the executive.
Yeah, federal spending power is a whole other rat's nest.
Well, not just federal, but
just any spending.
Yeah, so any spending has to be approved by your legislature, but the drawing up of the budget is the responsibility of the executive. So whether that's in Ottawa for the federal government or in Queen's Park or Edmonton. Yeah. And it's the same principle that operates in the U.S. Constitution, right? We always hear of, you know, the president's budget, Donald Trump's budget, but what in fact is going on is that the president draws up the budget as a menu and says, you know, please, Congress, please authorize the money for all these goodies that I can spend money on.
Yeah.
And then that's where the bargaining goes.
It seems to be, that's exactly how it works in a corporation, right? And at least as I'm trying to think of, I'm pretty sure the executive always crafted but usually they did it in combination with the budget committee. I'm thinking of a medical association or a hospital association.
Yeah.
You'd have a finance rep from the board.
Yeah.
And then
the board would have to approve it.
And the board approves, but it's crafted by the executive. So it's interesting, the parallel there. The other question I ask my American friends when we're talking about these sorts of things is the whole concept of something being self-evident. You know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Do you have that kind of language? And I apologize, feel free to skip this question because we're getting into nitty-gritties of constitutionalism, which you already said that's more your colleagues' bailiwick. But that sense of when I hear the word self-evident, I'm thinking, okay, propositional definitions, right? We're just going to put the dictionary definition out and we're going to build a country from that, as opposed to this more unwritten, the Plato's prelude sense of things, where there's a whole bunch of content that, people know it, but it's not propositional. You have to grow into that. You're not born with that knowledge, shall we say?
Yeah.
At least that's my sense of things. But can dilate on that a little bit. This different. What do you think about self-evident truths?
Well, you're referring to the language of the American Declaration of Independence. You know, that's some of the most majestic words ever spoken. Jefferson wrote them down, but he was the scribe. So it sounds like that's kind of the first principle of the regime. Lincoln actually in the Gettysburg Address refers to it as a proposition, right? And it almost sounds like, one is self-evident. Lincoln almost sounds like he's giving it the opposite meaning of what the Declaration says, even though Lincoln himself is a profound reader of the Declaration, right? So he seems at least to suggest, by calling it a proposition, that could be true, might not be true, right? It doesn't have the force of self-evident. I mean, I think what they're doing is setting up a regime, a kind of kingdom of ends, as Kant would put it, where each and every individual has absolute worth, and they have an inherent equality, regardless of what they do with that equality. So equality is a kind of base equality, and they knew for sure that Shawn is much more intelligent than John. He's better looking. The inequalities are more self-evident than the equality between Shawn and John. Yet, we will affirm in both of them the right to self-government. Right?
Yeah, because I think at least from, again, as an outsider, it seems like people get hung up on the idea that we can just define something. We can come forward and say, well, it's obvious. We're all equal, and now we're marching ahead. Yeah. And it leads to that same, rationalism in politics, rights-based, hyper-liberalism, where we're just going to define something, and now it shall be. The court said so. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine just published a book on the UN Declaration, but the book speaks of the inherent truth of dignity. Inherent. He takes it from Bernard Lonergan, actually, the notion of inherent truths, which isn't just we're just going to make this stuff up, but it's kind of like a precondition of the language we speak. And it's neither provable nor disprovable in a way. I'm kind of butchering Lonergan here, but I mean, our way of speaking, our way of thinking are always presupposed by what presupposes them, right? Our ability to speak presupposes our inability to speak. All that. So that's kind of how I sort of think of the inalienable or self-evident truths. That it's more than a simple kind of noble lie. Well, we got to tell you, you got to say this so that we can be effective, right? That's kind of the.
And Lonergan, he's the guy who wrote on Unwritten Constitution. Is that his area?
No. Lonergan was a Jesuit philosopher, Canadian actually. He's from Quebec.
Oh, okay.
But he taught at the Gregorium in Rome for many years. So he's most famously known for a very dense book called Insight.
Okay, yeah, no.
And his other book is Method in Theology. He and Vogelin were pals.
Oh.
But anyway, that's where my friend Chip Hughes he got that idea from. Inherent dignity, or at least the inherent part. He's applying that to the dignity.
Yeah. So related to the inherent, self-evident, propositional, arbitrary, this whole area, it kind of circles around the concept of warrant. What gives us warrant to say that this is something that we should promote? And if warrant is arbitrary on whatever the courts say, in ethics literature and medical ethics, one of my friends likes to use the term defeasible warrant. We don't need to have a perfect answer, but we need to have enough of a sense that we can go ahead. This could be proven wrong. And so have you ever, I guess it's related to legitimacy too, like what gives a particular political approach legitimacy, but that's different. That legitimacy is more in the citizens themselves. But the reason I'm struggling with all this is it seems like there's an arbitrariness, especially given the post-Charter of Rights world that we live in, where in 1993, euthanasia is absolutely wrong, right? In Canada, the Supreme Court says, no, absolutely wrong. 20 years later, well, no, it's absolutely wrong to block it. We should not have this on the books. And so how does that work? What would Plato say about that? What would Aristotle say about that?
Well, they might not give you the answer you want, because when it comes to people with certain physical defects, they say, well, you just kill them when they're better to do it when they're just bored. I mean, that's the Greek in them, I guess. Canada might deny it, but Canada has owes much more to the Israelites.
Yeah.
And Christians, of course.
Yeah.
And I mean, Tocqueville, when you're talking about Warrant, I was thinking of Tocqueville. He's got this line, and he says that the reason why democracies affirm equality is because of Jesus, because God came down and became man. Right? I mean, you could say, well, Hebraic idea of imago Dei, image of God, but I mean, they're all of a piece.
Right. And that's
Right.
the basis of our warrant. So
in a kind of, I mean, what's funny is even the hardcore secularists, they're not always explicit, but they agree. So, for example, David Walsh, in his newest book, it's on the secular, and he sort of subverts a lot of categories. But anyway, he points out how much people like John Stuart Mill loved the Sermon on the Mount.
Oh, fascinating.
And Walsh even makes the claim that the Sermon on the Mount is the perfect secularist document.
Interesting.
Why? Because you don't have miracles. You don't have appeals to the supernatural. Everything revolves around love.
Yeah.
And he incites, John Stuart Mill says, yeah, this is true. If you can just get rid of the, this is Mill speaking, if you just get rid of the miracle stuff, then, this would be a great thing.
Didn't Mill also have some weird? Wasn't he trying to?
Oh yeah, he had
create
lots
his
of
own
weird ideas.
Oh yeah, okay. He had a lot of weird. When you talk about
The
Mill,
religion of humanity is,
Yeah,
is his debt to Agos Comte, all that sort of stuff. But I'm just kind of looking at a sort of point here.
Unrequited love or something, worship of
so
his.
that So I mean, we can, there's lots of debates over, whether Western democracies have lost Christianity, should they regain it, this sort of stuff. But even the hardcore secularists affirm the truth of Christianity. And I see over your left shoulder on your bookshelf, you've got Tom Holland's book, Dominion.
Yes. Yeah.
Where he tracks a lot of that.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful book.
So I'm partway through the book that you recommended by Dan Mahoney, Conservative Foundations of a Liberal Order. And he's discussing Pierre Manon's book, and it's in French. I can't remember the title, but there's a line, and I haven't memorized the line, so I'll ruin it. But Manon says something to the effect of, we can celebrate secularization or secularism in terms of how we practice, but we must never allow it to corrupt how we think.
Yeah.
And so he said, yeah, great, practice in terms of separation of church and state, but don't ever think that way. And that's kind of what you're talking about. In the background, there's that Sermon on the Mount. There's the Tocqueville's comment about warrant and why dignity matters, or the Hebrews sent the Imago Dei. So that's what's been rolling around in my head is Manon's comment about secularization.
Yeah, I mean, Walsh makes this, it's kind of the essence of this book that he's just published, The Invisible Authority, where he says the secular world is the world in which the transcendent can be seen as transcendent, not as an analog of something else, but in its own terms.
Now I'm going to have to buy that book too. Books have gone up in price though since COVID. It's kind of frustrating.
It's the fall in the dollar. It's the dollar.
So let's talk about Walsh, because I love Walsh. You put me onto Walsh as well.
Yeah.
At the start of Mahoney's book, he said the French call them conservative liberals or liberal conservatives. He said, I'm writing from a conservative-minded liberalism, and yet he seems to blend the terms a bit. Don't ever tell him I said that, but. And Walsh says, no, I am a liberal. And yet I call him a conservative liberal. I would say he's 70% conservative, or 80% conservative and 20% liberal. So dilate on that a little bit. Americans are liberal, and you're a liberal, and so I don't want to get you in trouble.
Right.
But what do we do with those two words?
Yeah. Well, liberal is a very fluid term. Walsh himself says that Plato was the first liberal. and his argument is this: liberal derives from liberty, right? To be free means to do the right for its own sake, do the just thing for its own sake, and of course, that's what the Republic is all about. And that's that's what Kant is trying to grapple with.
Yeah,
that is what all the liberal philosophers are trying to grapple with. In varying degrees of success and failure.
So when you package that, going back to the Republic and even Kant, mind you, Kant, I guess we could say is much more in the liberal era.
Yeah.
But when we look at Hobbes and then Locke, Hume. Well, Hume, I would say, is more on the conservative side. We'll leave Hume out, so we'll just do Hobbes and Locke. Yeah. It does seem to me that there is an element of innovation in what they're talking about. They're centering our frame of reference around man and the material instead of the divine and the immaterial. And so there's a substantive difference between the old way of thinking, which I would call conservative, going right back, Plato, Aristotle, all the rest, versus this innovation that we see within liberalism. And I think it's actually isn't fair to liberalism to say that, oh no, we're going all the way back to Plato, man. You guys like Plato too. So what are your thoughts on that? Isn't liberalism actually a kind of an innovation? Because it does offer some good things too, and we can celebrate those good things if they are innovations. But if we try to twist it and say, if we try to say, oh no, it's always been there, well then what's so special about it?
Right. Yeah, that's a dissertation question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So the term liberal as a political term doesn't appear until you're in Spain in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars. So not till the earlier part of the 19th century. So Locke never called himself a liberal, not to mention Hobbes. Kant, probably not. These other language. Now, take Hobbes, for example, or Locke, right? You mentioned they're placing their ideas on a different basis than a Plato or even an Aristotle. They don't, they're materialists. They're, there's no summum bonum. There's just a summum malum. Avoid shameful death. So the vision of our humanity is, let's say, not as grand or noble as that you find in a Plato or an Aristotle. Okay. However, Hobbes says, and Locke agrees, that in entering into the Commonwealth as a meager little worm made from dust, you can make an eternal covenant. So there's a kind of disjunction between you might say, the metaphysics, the materialist metaphysics of these guys, and the political rationality. And I think they knew it, and they may have done it on purpose. I'm not claiming that they're esoteric Aristotelians.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say they're being esoteric. They're just trying to save their necks.
Yeah. Well, they're not trying to save their necks by being completely heterodox. Locke had to flee England, and of course true. Hobbes he had a tenuous existence too.
Yeah.
If you read a biography of Hobbes, he was known as being one of the most generous and lovely human beings. Hobbes was no Hobbesian.
Interesting.
And I bet you Locke was no Lockean.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a disjunction between life and philosophy there.
So I can't figure them out. It seems like we can use them to nefarious ends to promote this brand new liberalism that's going to take over the world. And then we say it's all about rights and man's the center of the universe and we're materialists, et cetera, et cetera. And we can say that Locke was just a deist and, so it's tricky using old dead guys to say what we want them to say today. Yeah, having said that,
we always get drawn back to them because we're in their orbit.
Yeah. Okay, so you have to go in a few minutes, and we got to half of our questions, so that's all right. We did pretty well. But maybe we'll end with this last question. What should I have asked you? So what am I totally missing the boat here, and what's keeping you awake at night aside from the birds and the trees and your palm trees outside your condo window? Yeah, what am I missing here?
Well, I don't know if it's a question rather than observation, but I can assure your Canadian viewers that the CBC is misleading you. I mean, when I moved to the U.S., there's a lot of stories in the news about American historians from Yale coming to the University of Toronto, to escape Donald Trump. Of course, there's all a cock-up story because anybody who knows anything about academic appointments knows that those things are in the works for months, years. So it is a total cock-up. And yet nobody from the CBC, you're the first sort of media person to reach out to interview me for going the other way. And what you never see in the CBC is that there was just way more Canadians down here than there are Americans going there.
I love it. Yeah. You know what?
So as I said, there's a few Canadians on the Skettle faculty here, and the joke is, we're doing the job the Americans don't want to do, which is teach American civics.
Well, it's a demonstrable fact. I mean, that's something we could just show with data. Yeah, way more Canadians go there. Anyways, John, I am just so thrilled to see that. I didn't know the details of your program, so thank you for telling me about that. I think I might have to tell my kids about it, and they're going to have to research
Absolutely.
it. Yeah. And I really, really appreciate you putting up with, like I say to other professors, I say, you should bill me for counseling because you're solving all these problems for me. So this is fantastic. I thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. We'll put links. Do you have a new book out that we could put a link to or anything?
No, I'm working on stuff. So
okay. Well, if you have any links,
still stuff simmering on the stove right now.
All right. If you have any links or anything, we could we'll put a link to your program in the show notes. But once again, my friend, really good to see you and excited.
It's great to see you. It's always a delight to speak with you, and you're doing terrific work. You're just amazing,
thank you, sir. Thank you. It's a lot of fun
to catch up to listen to them, listen to them all.
Yeah, no, just listen to the shorts. Okay, talk to you soon.
All right.